We've got a charged atmosphere for two rivals in the East Division. It's the Moonshine Throwdown. Marshall and Western Kentucky.
Intercepted by Key, and Key has one man to beat. A nice cut move. Edwards can't get him. Key takes it all the way. A pick six for Devin Key.
Here comes Talik Keaton to the sideline midfield. He's to the 40, gets a block, and he is gone! Touchdown, Marshall!
So please join me in welcoming the 21st head coach in WKU football history, Tyson Helton.
And Marshall's going to finish the year 9-4 and champions of the 2018 Gasparilla Bowl, the sixth consecutive bowl win for the Marshall Thundering Herd.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. It is the preview edition for the First Responders Bowl. Western Michigan taking on Western Kentucky. The game's going down tomorrow as we record December 30th on ESPN at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central for my folks down in BGKY. My apologies for the absolute lateness of this episode, but you know, it is what it is with the holiday season. I mean, people are very, very busy, and actually, I'm doing this thing solo. We just couldn't really, seem to get it together. And of course, I apologize. It doesn't mean we love you any less, Hilltoppers. It just means family first here at the Moonshine Throwdown and on the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. We love you, but family always takes precedent. But hey, you can't go wrong. You got KD here. I'm going to do the absolute best that I can do. I always try to bring you some quality content. So let's talk about this First Responders Bowl. Power index really, I guess it's a little bit less than a coin flip, 44.3% chance to win for Western Kentucky, although Vegas kind of likes Western, -3. Really, I don't know why the coin tossness. I don't think Western Michigan, I don't want to say they can't hang with Western Kentucky because they absolutely can. I don't think this is going to be a topper blowout, but unless there's just a lot of rust that's built up and the toppers aren't as smooth as they had been to end the regular season, I really can't see why the Hilltoppers can't really cruise to a 10-point or 14-point victory, and just kind of keep this one at arm's length. I don't know. Going down the schedules, Western Michigan is a 7-5 team. They were 5-3 in conference, second in the MAC West. They beat both those, Central Michigan and Miami of Ohio, which were the two teams that played for the MAC title. So, they're kind of like Marshall in that sense. They beat the best two teams in the conference according to the standings, but, got tripped up along the way to some other teams that they probably should have beaten. The all-time series, surprisingly to me, I wouldn't have thought that Western Michigan and Western Kentucky had played this many times, but going into this game, the all-time series is 11-3 and 1 tie in favor of Western Michigan. But of course, all those games have taken place between the years of 1923 and 1947. So it's been a long layoff for the Broncos and the Tops, and they will renew this series in Texas at the First Responders Bowl. Let's talk a few stats. We've got points per game, points allowed, yards per game, and yards allowed. If you look at these things, you could see, I guess, why the power index favors Western Michigan. They score more points. They gain more yardage, but on the defensive side, they also allow more points and they allow more yardage. And that, to me, is exactly why I think Western Kentucky is going to have their way with the Broncos. Points per game, Western Michigan, 34.2 points per game. Western Kentucky only scoring 25.6. Points allowed, right along with what Western Kentucky scores on average, Western Michigan is giving up 26.2 points per game, whereas Western Kentucky is only giving up 20 points per game. Yards per game gained offensively, Western Michigan 457 yards and 244 of those are on the ground. So they're still good for over 200 yards a game 244 yards through the air. So they're still good for over 200 yards a game through on the ground. Western Kentucky gaining 380 yards offensively per game, 251 through the air. Good for just about 130-ish yards on the ground. Yards allowed, Western Michigan giving up 414 yards per game, 228 through the air. And Western Kentucky giving up 337, 200 through the air. So they're really, this is a battle of strengths, really. Western Michigan is a more of a running team, despite the gain in pass yards per game. I think that if you bottle up their run, they're going to have an easier time of defeating them. And the stats, I believe, back me up a little bit. So, let's get into that. I guess the players to look out for Western Michigan. It all starts with quarterback John Wasink, the 6'2", 208-pound senior. Had a pretty good year passing the football. Takes care of the ball pretty well. Over a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. 222 out of 371 on the year, 2,904 yards, 19 touchdowns on the year, only 7 interceptions. So he does a pretty good job of taking care of the football. Running back Levante Bellamy, though. 5'9", 190-pound senior. Get this stat line: 248 carries on the year, 1,412 yards. Going in before bowl season started, that was good for 10th in the nation in rushing yards. 23 touchdowns on the ground, good for first in the nation. 5.7 yards per carry. So now you can see why I think, okay, if Western Kentucky can bottle up this rushing game, they're going to have an easier time defeating Western Michigan. So they will have their hands full with Bellamy for sure. Wide receiver Sky Moore, 5'9", 195-pound freshman, is the leading receiver. 47 catches for 734 yards, 3 touchdowns, good for 15.6 yards per reception. But equally as dangerous, if not a little more so, is tight end Giovanni Ricci, the 6'3", 240-pound senior. Also 47 catches on the season, slightly less yardage, 622 yards, but 8 touchdowns through the air, good for 13.2 yards per catch. A couple of other guys we got to talk about, Keith Mixon and Deshaun Bussell combined for 71 catches, another 885 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So there are weapons offensively for Western Michigan, in the receiving game. It's not just a one-trick pony with the rushing game. I just think, when you've got the nation's 10th leading rusher and the nation's leading touchdown getter on the ground, that's a huge weapon. And if you can bottle that up and just kind of see how they can damage you through the air, it just seems like a better recipe for victory if you're the Hilltoppers. So how about defense? Defensively, we got a trio of guys we're going to talk about. Leading tackler, linebacker Treshawn Hayward, the 6'1", 225-pound junior, 132 tackles on the season, 69 of those solo, 5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. That is a lot of tackles, well over 10 per game for Hayward. Defensive end Ali Fiad, the 6'2", 255-pound junior, 42 tackles, 22 of those solo, 6.5 sacks on the season, 4 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery. Definitely one you're going to want to have to put a circle around when you talk about 6.5 sacks and 4 forced fumbles on the season. That'll be a good game within the game to see which defense plays best to the opposition's. Which offensive line can react best to the defensive end. You got Ali Fiad here for Western Michigan. And, of course, the bookends for Western Kentucky, D'Angelo Malone, Juwan Jones. Ought to be a really, really nice game within the game there. And defensively, last guy we're going to talk about, defensive back Patrick Lupro, the 5'10", 185-pound sophomore, 57 tackles on the season, 20 of those solo, 1 sack, 1 fumble recovery, and 3 interceptions. So, look, we talk about, all the guys that have had a good season for Western Michigan, all the guys that have come on throughout the season for Western Kentucky. And if you ask me, Western Kentucky, WKU, was playing their best football at the end of the season. We talked about it many, many times throughout the year while we were recording regular season episodes. It seems like ancient history, week 1 and that loss way back when against Central Arkansas. That just seems like it happened like a decade ago. And to look at where the Toppers had come towards the end of the regular season, they were definitely playing their best football. I don't think anybody in Conference USA, would have wanted to lock horns with them the last week of the season. Not even conference champion FAU. They were cruising as well, but Western Kentucky was playing some daggone good football. So, and like I said, unless there's just a tremendous amount of rust and, they come out flat and slow and, the layoff has just gotten to them, I think this is going to be a fairly easy game for Western Kentucky. They've got a myriad of playmakers on the offensive side and the defensive side. I like the way they match up with Western Michigan at just about every position. I just don't think that there's too much to worry about if you're a Hilltopper. Now, of course, it's bowl season, and you never know exactly how those are going to play out. Teams tend to get a little bit more creative. You might see things that you haven't seen all year because what do you got to lose? Your season's basically over. You want to win the last one, be able to hang another banner at the stadium that you were First Responders Bowl champions. And of course, this would be, Western's first bowl victory if they were to win in quite a few years. I mean, I was at the Cure Bowl in year 1 of Mike Sanford, and I thought that they were going to cruise to victory there too against Georgia State, but it didn't happen. And of course, an abysmal season last season kept the Toppers from any sort of bowl consideration. So, hey, we're back. It's Tyson Helton year 1, bowl eligible, looking to go +6 in the win column from last year, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I like the Toppers to get that done, and to get one more victory in the left-hand column for Conference USA during bowl season, because let's face it, it's been pretty terrible for Conference USA. Generally, as a conference, we do pretty well in bowl season, and this year it's not panning out. You could usually always bank on a win for Marshall. They didn't hold their own against UCF. Charlotte kind of got beat down in the Bahamas Bowl against Buffalo. Louisiana Tech is so far the lone bright spot. They managed to beat Miami, and that's awesome. But how about an East Division team getting a bowl win? Can we do that, please? We boast a lot on this podcast about football in the East because, by and large, it is the strongest football conference. Most of the champions come from the East Division, at least here recently. So, and for our division to not have a strong showing in bowl season is pretty pathetic. So we're counting on Western Kentucky to bring one home for the East Division. That's for sure. Look, so ultimately, what do the Toppers have to do to get a win? Okay, and I've talked about it a lot so far. You stop the run, you have a more than legitimate shot of getting a win in this First Responders Bowl. So number 1, my point of emphasis and key to victory for the Toppers is to control the line of scrimmage. If Levante Bellamy can't get going and he can't capitalize on a really awesome season here in the bowl game, if they keep him from crossing the 1,500-yard mark, which would mean limiting him to 88 yards or less, I think that's a pretty good recipe for victory. And conversely, if the Topper offensive line is able to move around these defenders for Western Michigan and open holes for Ty Story to scramble a little bit on some broken pass plays or some design runs to let Gage Walker get over 100 yards, of course that goes a long way into making things easier for your offensive play calling if you're able to run the ball when you need to or want to. Number 2, I think Walker and Story are going to combine for over 150 yards on the ground and get 3 touchdowns. If they can do that, of course, I just said it. You control the line of scrimmage. Those 2 guys have the ability to run at will. It's going to be a long day for Western Michigan. You're able to control the clock. You're able to move the chains. you're able to prolong drives and just keep their offense standing on the sideline watching you move 10 yards at a time. Number 3, if you're going to need some quick strikes, if you're going to take some chances, I think your best bet to do that is to get Pearson the ball in space. Look for Joshua Simon down the seam, and of course, hit Lucky Jackson over the top. That's the recipe for success in the pass game. Let your playmakers do what they do best, and that's the 3 guys and where they love to feast. Get Ja'Cour Pearson in space, let him make moves and scurry to the end zone. Let Joshua Simon work the seams against mismatches on linebackers and on safeties and things like that. I mean, it's just incredibly hard to guard a big body that also goes, 6'5" or something like that. I mean, he's a real weapon. And you talk about over the top, the big long play, it's always Lucky. It's not always Lucky, but towards the end of the season, it's been Lucky Jackson more often than not. Long plays have been his forte the latter half of this regular season. So there's no reason to think that it can't happen again or twice or 3 times in bowl season. And number 4, you don't need it, but it's always cool to see that signature trick play from Western Kentucky. Tyson Helton does a great job of drawing those up. The boys do an excellent job of executing those plays. And it's just kind of like, you're the artist signing the painting. That trick play from Western Kentucky in bowl season is just the, that you just expect to see it. And I think there's one in the playbook that hasn't been used. That, it's not like you have to, but I just love it. I just love to see, I was looking, I use, like so many others, I'm sure I have Time Hop on my phone. And just a few days ago, I was scrolling through Time Hop and it was the fake, a punt, I think, where that landed Western Kentucky on the number 1, the ESPN top 10, the top play from bowl season there. That was so cool, man, against Memphis way back when. So anyway, you do those 4 things, and I think we have an excellent chance to get a really nice victory for Western Kentucky. Go +6 in the win column, get that 9th win. I mean, wow, what a nice springboard into the offseason to wrap up recruiting. Look forward to spring ball. And I really think, if Western they're very much in flux. Like I said, we mentioned with the Marshall Bowl game wrap-up episode, rosters will be very much in flux for the next few months. Guys will come, guys will go. Of course, there's going to be recruiting that comes along. And, of course, the biggest question mark that's going to surround this Western Kentucky team is who's going to be the quarterback next year? Is it going to be Stephen Duncan? Excuse me. Is it going to be someone else? Because all we really know is that it will not be Ty Story. He's exhausted his eligibility after this game and just simply can't play college football anymore. So it'll be really, really intriguing to see the direction that Tyson Helton goes. Does he bring in a grad transfer? Does he go try to find, I know they've got one quarterback signed already from the early signing period from way out west, like in the state of Washington or something like that. Man, coming all the way across country. But it'll be interesting to see how they tackle that. Will Stephen Duncan be the man coming back from injury? Will they go try to get a graduate transfer or some other type of transfer to compete for the job, or what? I'm intrigued to see how that goes. But let's talk about a 200-proof player before we get into all that. To me, it's D'Angelo Malone. He's been the guy. He's been wrecking shop. I think you talk about a guy that was Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year. How can he not be your 200-proof player? He's obviously the guy that every offensive coordinator has to account for on every single play. And hey, I think he's my 200-proof player, without a doubt. Looking for big plays off the edge, looking to maybe even make a bunch of plays that won't show up in a box score. Catching a constant double team on a block to free somebody else up, things like that. You just have to account for D'Angelo Malone. I think his playmaking ability speaks for itself. We don't have to boast him up. We know what he's all about. We know how he can wreak havoc in a game. And without question, I look for him to do the same thing and close out what has been a phenomenal 2019 season. Looking forward to having that guy back on the hill next year. Score prediction. I mentioned it before. I just have the feeling that this is going to be a not relatively easy game, but I just think the Toppers can keep this one at arm's length all game long, unless the turnover bug, just pops its ugly head up and bites the Tops like it did the Herd. But give me Western Kentucky 38-28. 10-point win for the Tops, bringing home a First Responders Bowl trophy, going +6 in the win column in year one, and looking like a really strong team going into 2020 for Conference USA. So that's it. That's your First Responders Bowl preview, brought to you by me, KD. I wish the guys were here with me to talk a little football, but hey, family first, man. It is what it is. Before we get out of here, we're going to transition, and I got to talk about, since we recorded, and these all came, we haven't recorded a preview or a Western Kentucky episode since all the all-conference teams came out, and we've just got to give props to those guys because it's pretty amazing how many guys from Marshall and Western Kentucky made the team. We talked about a lot of the guys from the Herd when we did the preview episode there. But let's talk about these Conference USA first teamers. I had some other things, the regular season final grades that I was hoping to get Steven to do. And maybe we'll do that after when we do the wrap up for the bowl game. And some other questions that I wanted to, revisit, offensive MVP in his eyes, defensive, special teams, things like that. Maybe we'll revisit that when we do a bowl game wrap up because I really would like to get his perspective on that. But let's talk about these all conference teams, man. Conference USA first team offense saw 2 Hilltoppers make the squad. Of course, offensive lineman Miles Pate and wide receiver Lucky Jackson. Special teams saw, defensively, of course, you've got defensive player of the year, D'Angelo Malone over there. Of course, he lands on the first team all conference defensive team. And of course, and in special teams, the punter, the Aussie, makes first team all conference. John Haggerty, heck of a job this year. Unbelievable job. So let's move along to the second team, Conference USA all conference second team offense. Gage Walker and Ja'Cour Pearson. I mean, if not for the amazing year that Brendan Knox had, I don't think there is a valid argument that would keep Gage Walker on the second team. He had a great year after not taking a snap, on the offensive side the year before. Really came out of nowhere for a lot of these defensive coordinators in the conference to have to account for, and had a phenomenal season, over 1,100 yards rushing. I mean, wow, just what a great story. And then Ja'Cour Pearson really came into his own, feasting, like I said before, in the middle of the field, making a lot of plays, gaining a lot of yards after the catch. Just a real weapon for Ty Story in this Hilltopper offense. And landing on the second team, special teams, had a little mishap there. Long snapper, Jared Nash. So congratulations to Jared Nash as well. And then the freshman had 3 guys Western Kentucky had on the all-freshman team. Offensive lineman Gunnar Britton, of course, the aforementioned tight end Joshua Simon, and defensive lineman Ricky Barber. Future's looking good on the Hill. You get a couple on the offensive side and one on the defensive side, and the two of those are linemen. I mean, that's awesome. That's the kind of stuff you want to see for the future on the Hill. Honorable mention, offensive lineman Jordan Meredith, Jeremy Darvin, tight end again, Joshua Simon, Jalen George, Kyle Bailey, and then the entire freaking secondary, Coco Darden, Devin Key, and Antoine Kincaid. 10 guys on the honorable mention list. I mean, there are a lot of guys that I could have a valid argument that could have landed or should have landed on at least the second team. Honestly, I don't know how Antoine Kincaid doesn't make the first team, in my opinion. That is the absolute biggest snub in all of the all conference teams across all teams. I mean, that guy had a phenomenal season. So, take it for what it's worth. And of course, individual effort, individual accolades. I called it the day before it came out. I thought that Ty Storey had a legitimate shot of being the Conference USA Newcomer of the Year, and I'll be darned if he wasn't. So congratulations to, topper QB, Ty Storey. D'Angelo Malone, we've said it many, many times, Defensive Player of the Year, well-deserved. I mean, probably some folks had their eyebrows raised a little bit because, Highsmith from Charlotte landed on so many like all-American teams that I'm sure there might have been a few people that were like, what? How did Malone, get the nod over Highsmith? But he earned it. So what? He's a great player. And the Conference USA coaches agreed with that. And of course, who else is your Conference USA 2019 Coach of the Year but Tyson Helton? A phenomenal job in year one. Really got the Toppers going in an upward trajectory. If you're not feeling good about Western Kentucky football, you better start feeling good if you wear a lot of red. Now, if you wear just about anything else, you better start worrying a little bit more about Western Kentucky football because it looks like the rebuild is a fast track. It's not a work in progress as much as probably anticipated. The fruits of the labor have begun blooming and being harvested a lot quicker. And it's not out of the realm of possibility to say right now that Western Kentucky will compete for a Conference USA title in year 2 under Tyson Helton if they can get the quarterback situation figured out, whatever that means. If it's Duncan, great. If it's a graduate transfer, great. If it's something else, great. If that gets figured out, looks like a lot of the weapons will be returning, to the Hill to make a really good push for Conference USA's title in 2020. So let me talk about some final thoughts, and I'm going to get out of here, and we'll get you guys prepared or let you guys settle in and get ready to watch this bowl game tomorrow. What a phenomenal season 2019 was for Western Kentucky. There were some ups, there were some downs, of course. The season started off as rocky as it could start, and I'm sure a lot of folks might have checked out after week 1 and didn't find themselves checking back in until about midway through the season. But we were there for every game, every week, and, we could see it. And if you stuck with them for the whole season, you could see too that this team got better and better and better every week. And of course they had some setbacks. What team doesn't? Very few teams just have their way with the college football world all season long. But after that tough loss to the FCS squad, Central Arkansas, we started to see a little bit of a bounce back. You get a win and you lose one that you wish you could have gotten from Louisville. That would have been nice for the in-state bragging rights. But, Louisville ultimately also turned out to be a pretty good team in year 1 under Scott Satterfield, and we thought they would be down and, kind of out. It would take a little bit longer to get a rebuild going there too. But they turned out to be a really good team by the end of the season as well. You get a nice win over an Army team. You beat an Arkansas team like a drum at their house and get paid for it, and then you turn right around and beat them in basketball and, cash that 1.5 milli and go 3-0 against the Razorbacks. Don't count on another series with Arkansas anytime soon, but, thanks for the dubs and thanks for the check. You split your rivalry games. You do beat Middle Tennessee in the finale of the season. But of course, if not for maybe one of the most epic field goal sequences that we will ever see in this rivalry, you might steal a win at Marshall as well. But, Justin Rowasser, Conference USA Special Teams Player of the Year, just, he earned that award for a reason. He's a really good one. And I don't think there was a more, gutsy type clutch effort all season than what Rowasser put forth there with the all the icings and then in the rain and being able to nail that 53-yarder. But, take that out of account. A lot of people still say, hey, if we don't spot Marshall 14 points, we win that game. And it's hard to argue against that. You can't change the score, but you got to feel good about where you're at with that game. So there's a lot to be happy about in year one under Tyson Helton, and a couple of there's nothing better than to close out the year than with a nice bowl win, getting to 9 wins, going +6 in the win column, and really springboarding into 2020 to finish up the recruiting in February and beyond. See who you can get in here to plug some holes that may be created by departures or transfers or whatever. And you got to like the way things are going in Bowling Green. So I'm going to get out of here. Enjoy the bowl game. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Have a happy, healthy New Year. And we'll see you for the wrap-up episodes. Go Tops. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.